Welcome to The Pod, a podcast for women in healthcare leadership, a heartfelt space where women executives in healthcare and their allies unite to support and uplift each other with personal stories that inspire positive change, nurture optimistic mindsets, and celebrate diverse perspectives. I'm your host, Dr. Kristen Woods. The servant leader is a servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first. Then the conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. Today's guest embodies what is meant by servant leadership. Carrie Bernard is a community-based family physician who has practiced for the past 25 years in the growing multicultural community of Brampton, Ontario. Passionate about ethics, public health, and global health, Dr. Bernard pursued her Master's of Public Health with a focus on ethics. She subsequently led an initiative to develop a novel ethics curriculum for family medicine residents at the University of Toronto, provided expert advice as a member of Public Health Ontario's Committee on Communicable Diseases, and was a member of the Ontario COVID-19 Bioethics Table, the group responsible for guiding the Ontario Ministry of Health regarding the ethical tensions that arose during the worst of the pandemic. Dr. Bernard has held various leadership roles in family medicine at McMaster University and the University of Toronto, with her driving passion being empowering community-based family physicians to expand their scopes in both clinical and academic settings. She works with the Ontario College of Family Physicians as a leader in their mental health and addictions community of practice and is the current president of the College of Family Physicians of Canada. Dr. Bernard describes her ongoing meditation practice as central to all her roles as physician, leader, educator, and community member. Welcome to the pod, Carrie.
Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be here today.
Well, we're delighted to have you, and I'd love to just dig into this and start with your background. So what in your background growing up drew you to healthcare as a career?
Interestingly, I never ever thought about being a doctor when I was younger, and I think that might have been a gendered issue a little bit. I worked as a young child volunteering at a camp for children with disabilities. And when I was 12, the adult who came was an occupational therapist. So in my mind, from that moment on, I was going to be an occupational therapist growing up. And that's what I pursued. And in my first year of occupational therapy, when I took anatomy, I was just blown away. And I thought, I want to be a doctor. It had never occurred to me. But at that time in Canada, education was highly subsidized by the population, and I felt a duty to finish my training, and then I felt a duty to keep working. So I loved what I did. I was a pediatric occupational therapist, but then after 6 years, I decided I still wanted to study medicine, and I sort of paid back what I owed the population, and I promised myself that I would take what I learned from occupational therapy into my career as a physician. And I've done so to this day.
It's amazing just listening to the language that you use and the way you're framing your background. It is very clear that you are a servant leader. And we talked before, and you mentioned in our pre-interview that you once applied for a leadership role just for practice, not even expecting to get the role. Can you tell us about that story and what you learned from it?
Certainly. And I do wonder if there was a gendered aspect to that as well, because when I looked at the role, it interested me, it intrigued me, I wanted to do it, but I did not think that I had the qualifications. I looked at all the boxes and I thought, I don't have enough leadership experience. But given that this is a role I would like, I'm going to apply so I can practice going to the interview and I can, get dressed up and be there and see what kinds of questions. And maybe in the future, there'll be another role at this organization that I could be a part of. And having the the lack of expectation, I think I was a little bit less nervous. And I went to the interview with a commitment to just be myself. I decided to share my honest strengths and to actually describe what kind of supports I might need should I actually get the role, and to ask whatever questions I had because I didn't feel that I had anything to lose. Um, and I was shocked because I got the job. Part of what I did when I was there, they asked me to do a presentation about my vision for the role. And I found that a bit hard because I was an outsider. I didn't work there, I wasn't involved very much. And so I agreed to do what they asked me to do. But I asked them if it was okay to also share what I would really do to prepare myself to create a vision, that if I had the role, how, when I was in the role, who I would interview, who I'd speak with, how I would engage people, because that seemed to be an easier question for me to answer. I did come up with a vision, but I expressed that I felt it was necessarily a limited vision because I wasn't part of the organization. So this was an interesting experience for me, and I learned a lot of things. One of them I heard spoken about before when I was at a conference for women in leadership, and that was that frequently women look at all of the criteria and they expect to have 100% of them to apply for a job when that's not necessarily how men think about it. And I learned I didn't have to have every single last criteria to apply for this job. I also learned that if I'm honest about myself and share my honest skills and my honest needs, when I arrive in the position, there's no surprise for me or for anyone. And I can hit the ground running with the expectations of what supports I will have in the role.
I love that. And you're absolutely right. Data and studies show that women in particular will often hold back from applying for a role if they don't feel they check every box. So I love that you brought that out. I'll add to it and say also during interviewing, sometimes we stick so rigidly to the question, we miss the opportunity to tell our story or to use the question creatively to tell our story, how we think, what's our methodology that we work from, and our ethics. So I love how you approached that interview and the surprise results you had. How has that influenced subsequent interviews and jobs that you've taken?
Interestingly, I wouldn't be here as president right now had I not learned that lesson. Um, when I applied to be on the board of the College of Family Physicians of Canada, it was the first year they actually had contested elections. So I was intrigued. Before, it was more that people were invited to apply and there were elections, but they weren't contested. The membership affirmed. And this was the first time there would be a competition. And I looked at the current board members and I kind of scratched my head because people who were already serving had far longer histories of leadership in academia than I had. Um, and I chose to be inspired by that rather than intimidated, to think, wow, what a wonderful group of people that would be for me to learn from and to be around. And I'm going to apply because it's up to the membership to decide. And if my particular set of skills and attributes are appropriate for the organization at this time, it will be. And if not, I can learn what more I need to do. And that took me to being on the board of directors at the CFPC. So I'm glad I learned that lesson because it's brought me so much fulfillment over the past many years.
Yeah, amazing. And you're now president of the College of Family Physicians of Canada. How has this role met or differed from your expectations?
I think that when I first came into this, because I saw and was so impressed by my colleagues, I imagined that I would be just learning for quite a few years before I could share a lot of my own perspective. But that wasn't the case because everybody's perspectives were welcomed. We were all there for a reason. And I was so enjoyable to be in a space where I could always speak up when I didn't understand something. And for me, I think there's pressure sometimes for people when they're in a leadership role to act like they understand something, to not want to show that they are lacking in some way, yet approaching all of our work with curiosity and saying, I don't quite understand that, or could you clarify, has been some of the most fun that I've had because usually when I have a question, someone else does too. And not everybody feels comfortable speaking up. So as I brought up questions, we learned more together. We learned more about our policies and procedures and how we needed to communicate with people in a better way. And I learned more about everything to do with being on a board, and my perspective was welcomed. So I've always been a person who has a lot of questions. When you're in school and you're the person the teacher says, okay, just wait. You talk too much when you're the talking too much kid. So being in a place where curiosity was welcomed was really, really refreshing. And I learned that having questions is sometimes better than being certain. Because when we think we're certain and we know how something works and we don't ask that question, we can sometimes misunderstand.
I love that what you talked about with curiosity being welcomed. And I think a lot of people say we welcome curiosity. We may not always demonstrate the behaviors that really say we welcomed curiosity. So, what behaviors in that group really told you that your curiosity was welcomed?
A lot of it was the behavior of the leaders. So the presidents were always there seems to be a culture of reaching out to new board members. So just that, there can be a bit of an aura. You're a little intimidated when you first come on the board, but having the person who's running the show reach out and just informally, hey, if you ever need anything, give me a call. Here's my email, made me feel that who I was welcome and that person wanted me to succeed. And so I initially didn't always ask my question at a board meeting in front of everybody. I usually would reach out to the president because they made me feel welcome. And oftentimes they brought that question back to the group. So to say, listen, Carrie shared this. I think we actually should talk about it, which then built my confidence in knowing that my questions were not just newbie questions. Sometimes they might be, and that would be just like a point of information, but other times they were questions worthy of discussion by the whole group. So I think leadership really sets the tone for how questions are handled and whether curiosity is truly welcomed. It can be hard because we're always on a time frame and we're busy and we have a lot to get done. But I always felt that there was enough time for me to understand that if I was going to be asked to vote on something, it was fine for me to take the time to understand before I voted. And that's somewhere where I want to sit, where I want to feel that my thinking counts when I'm there.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic story that includes those behaviors that we can do to others to help them feel included and that their curiosity matters and that they can take up the space that we value, the expertise they bring, and to take that space because that's why we invited them on the board or invited them on the team.
Exactly.
One of the things I read in an article that you printed, and you were reflecting on your induction in ceremony into the college, and you felt like it was too much fanfare and pomp and circumstance, and you wanted to not really have that done. But a colleague, you said, helped you understand that accepting the responsibility to lead the organization, that this ceremony helps show that you're accepting to lead with humility and respect. And I didn't say that as well as you did, but maybe you could relay this.
Sure. It's such an interesting experience for me because I'm the kind of person, I'm more comfortable helping others shine. I'm a bit of an introvert. I don't like to be front and center unless I really have something to share, something to say. So being on stage and the regalia, it's a very formal ceremony. I was feeling uncomfortable. But my colleague who helped me, I mean, her perspective, she's an army general. So there's a lot of ceremony in that organization, and there's a lot of hierarchy. And she shared with me that the moment when I would become president was the moment that I agreed to serve the organization. That there's one spokesperson, the president is a spokesperson, and that taking on that responsibility was worthy of ceremony because it demonstrated to everybody that this is the person who has accepted that responsibility for the next year. And that really struck me because that I could get behind. I had sort of perceived it as like a celebration of me, which didn't make sense. I hadn't been president yet. So I couldn't think around the way, why it was worthy, but her expression, of service, her words of speaking about service spoke to me. I think it's natural to speak of service when you're in the forces. And for me, service speaks to my heart and how I approach my life. And so if you had been watching from across the room, when she first asked me, I was sort of like kind of dejected. And then when she spoke about it, my whole demeanor lit up, and it really pushed me to start learning more about servant leadership. Like I got interested in this as a concept.
Amazing. And it is all about perspective. And sometimes we can isolate ourselves in our own perspective, and it takes someone else to help shine a new lens. It's a really powerful story. And now we've talked a bit about servant leadership, and we opened with a quote about that. And you write passionately about servant leadership. In fact, in the June Canadian Family Practice article that you published, you spoke a lot about servant leadership. And you referenced Robert Greenleaf's concept of someone who comes to leadership with a feeling that they want first and foremost to serve. How did you discover this leadership philosophy, and how does it show up in your leadership practice?
I think two paths brought me to this. One was the feeling about the induction ceremony. And the other was in the lead up to being president. Many people asked me what my plans were. Like, what was I going to do as president? That I was supposed to have this really strong idea for my presidency. And I was really struggling about this vision that I was supposed to be imposing on the organization. Because my approach to my own work and my own leadership is very, very influenced by my meditation practice, which I ask myself every day, like, what needs to be done? So trying to let go of the distractions of my personal egoic principles or my attachments or my anxieties or what I feel in the moment. It's more what needs to happen. And that doesn't mean I don't have interests, passions, or desires. Of course I do. But for things that are really important, especially something like the presidency of a national organization, I really felt that my job as president was to serve the needs of the organization. And I was thinking, what if I had this big goal going in and then the pandemic happened? Like I couldn't, that of course, what would need to happen is to serve the needs of the organization. Very similar to that interview. I could create an idea for what should happen in the portfolio, but without being there, it would obviously be somewhat deficient. And coming up with a full vision for my year as president without actually being in the position and asking what needs to be done. Being with the executive team to understand where they've been over the year, what are their fears, what are their anxieties. This is a new president. we had a new CEO who had just been in the role for 6 months. So for me, I when I came across Greenleaf's work on service because of my discussion at the induction ceremony, I just settled into knowing that that was how I wanted to approach things. That my role is to serve the organization. It doesn't mean that I'm erased. It doesn't mean my actual capabilities and strengths aren't the things that I built upon. Those are what I use to be able to succeed in the role. But first and foremost, I'm there to serve.
So I love the concept of using your daily meditation to set intentions. And I wonder how that helped you navigate the tension when you felt that you were pulled between two roles, the roles of Carrie, Dr. Bernard, and president of this organization. And in your article, you talk about being both. Can you explain what tension you felt and how you dealt with that?
I think that this is a common situation for leaders where, especially as we have more and more conflict in the world right now, there will be times where something needs to happen that isn't the first personal choice of the leader, where there's a conflict. And if everything else was put aside and you got to decide exactly what you wanted to do, you would take a certain path. But that is not necessarily the path that needs to be taken. And it can be hard because when there's a strong conflict that engages a leader emotionally, we don't like that feeling and we can want to end it. So, like, you don't want to feel in such disharmony. And so making a choice is quite compelling. And it felt like I had to choose, like, do I do what I want or what I think is best? And really, my practice helped me to just stay with that moment and to recognize that there is tension, there is discomfort. That's the truth of the matter in this moment. And my practice teaches me that I need both wisdom and compassion to do what needs to be done. I need both. And it made me stop and consider that to walk with wisdom in this moment, I needed compassion to guide me. So in these moments of conflict where we're uncertain and we want to do what we want to do, compassion helps me to listen better. It helps me to let go of my pull towards a certain side where I become more humble and listen and be curious. And taking the time to really listen without having a rebuttal, like without already having an idea in my head of how I'm going to share my side of things, it makes such conflict less of a debate and then more of a shared issue. So we have an issue together. There are differing opinions. This doesn't solve divisive problems, but it helps to reduce the divisiveness amongst the people. And so for me, really sitting with my discomfort really helped me to, instead of wanting people to hear my side, it helped me listen better to other aspects of the issue. And it helped me to have great comfort with the decision that if it was just me alone, not me as president, would have been a different decision.
Again, very powerful story. And it makes me wonder, as a leader, sometimes we do have to select. We can't always do what other people choose, or there may be too many choices and we can't always get to a democracy. So sometimes as a leader, we have to take a stance and say, this is how we're going to do it, especially in times of urgency, chaos, or extreme circumstance. How can you differentiate how you think about that and how being a compassionate leader and listener helps you show up when you have to be a little more directive?
I do not think these things are in complete tension because one leads to the other. So being a good listener, being open to curiosity, demonstrating an ability to hear conflicting attitudes for real and to take them in and to consider them as a leader inspires trust. People around us, when we have a terrible conflict, and there are many different venues that could be chosen and many different options which are in conflict with one another, everybody knows that a choice needs to be made. And in my experience, when I have either led or been around leaders who have led with openness, compassion, and transparency at a time when a decision needs to be made, I have experienced great acceptance of that decision. Not happiness, because the people whose side isn't chosen are not happy, but I have not seen distrust or unhappiness with the leadership decision, because a decision has to be made, and that's the role. When you're the leader like that, you are in the unenviable position of having to make the decision that is going to make some people unhappy. That comes with the job.
It does. And we have to be comfortable with that discomfort, as you so aptly said, which leads me to my next question, because in fact, I was just talking with a client that I coach today who said, leadership is lonely. And I think you and I were talking about that, and you said, not for me. Can you talk a little bit about how leadership is more of a community and why you don't feel so lonely?
I think, first of all, I seek environments where there's community. So like I seek out, I imagine it could be lonelier, but I seek environments where decision making is often shared. So I'm at a board, the decision making is mostly shared. And I seek to lead with open communication, transparency, so that people feel included. And when there are times that I need to make a decision, I feel my team with me. I feel the history of our communication. I feel stronger because of the board and the executive team, so that when I have to make a decision, I know that they are there with me. So I don't, even though I'm the one taking the responsibility for it, how did I come to that decision? I didn't come to it all by myself. I came to it through the discussions that we had over time. I choose not to work in environments where I'm all alone making decisions. I think I personally would have a hard time. I would feel lonely running a business all by myself without others, because I like learning from the critique of my colleagues and pushing ideas back and forth. So I think that's why I don't feel so lonely, and that's why I feel empowered. I feel more empowered to make decisions by myself because of the work that we've done leading up to decisions like that.
So one of the things I keep hearing as a core concept, but we haven't used the word yet, is trust. There's an article that talks about different perspectives and the importance of different perspectives. But without trust, our own diversity can actually drive people further apart. And so I'm just so impressed by how you've built trust in your leadership teams and in the work that you've done. But now I'm curious, your article talks about this increasingly divisive world where people are struggling to hold the complexity that we live in, because it's easier when we have yes or no answers, but there's a whole lot of maybes in between, and it can be challenging to hold that space or to even function in that ambiguous in between of yes and no. I'm wondering what challenges you see in healthcare leadership today and how you think we can best approach those.
I'm so happy that you asked that question, because we see this in our world in general. We see it on television, but it is deeply affecting healthcare. We see people's perspectives becoming increasingly binary and somewhat divided, even in areas that used to be so much a given, like vaccines and public health. And I'm not sure if it's social media algorithms or what's pushing people to be so much more divided, but they seem less interested in understanding the other side. Like it seems that we've become more entrenched in sharing our side. I feel that as a leader, we need to always remember that we lead everyone. So even when there's a decision that may, in the end, favor a particular side, the results still affect everyone. So we need to consider everyone, no matter what happens when we make decisions, because everyone will be affected. So it's not just balancing it out, it's also thinking about the afterwards, what happens afterwards. And in my experience, like taking the time to listen and to try to understand, even when we already think we can't, we think that perspective doesn't make sense to me, taking the time to understand what we perceive as the other side, even when the other side isn't doing the same thing, it is helpful. When I do that, it helps me to expand my comprehension of issues, but it also brings me closer to those who might be affected by the decisions. If I sit in a room and I try and understand, then I can plan better for the after part. So, because these people are still affected by the decisions afterwards. And one thing that I try to do, which is hard, but I try to take the passion with which I want someone else to understand me. When I think about, I need them to understand, and I apply that same passion to trying to understand them. So if I seek to understand as hard and as much as I want to be understood, I feel there's a bit of a shift towards sharing the dilemma. And instead of a debate, it sort of becomes a dilemma. It's subtle. I know it's not a big enough shift for people who want an easy answer, but to me, that's how we need to approach these decisions as we move forward, where people are trying to pull us apart. We need to try to understand and make this a shared dilemma as opposed to a debate.
I love how you frame that with dilemma rather than debate, and it keeps it in that conversation space. Carrie, this has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot. I'm very moved by your servant leadership and your humility. And the big takeaways that I have today is that compassionate leadership doesn't have to be lonely. And the more curious we are and compassionate we are, the more our voices are heard as well, because we have the opportunity to continue the conversation.
Exactly. That is, oh, yes.
Okay, I was going to say, what should we add to wrap this up?
No, that is it. When we're curious, we make room for more people, including ourselves. And I think that more traditional ideas of how to get your point across, we don't realize that by being curious and making space for others, there will still be space for us. We have space.
Yes. Well, that is an abundant attitude, and it's been an abundant conversation. And I'm so glad that you joined us on the pod today.
Well, thank you for making the time, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the pod. I invite you to join our pod every month as we empower one another, fostering a world where women in healthcare leadership thrive.